Today, I'm going to tackle the question I get from everyone, even the musicologists and the academics. After they find out I'm a Clara Schumann researcher, they always ask about her music and her importance, but inevitably always comes the question, what happened with Brahms? Everyone wants to know. It's natural, no judgment. I was the same way. I got into researching Clara because I was reading his letters out of fascination with his music, and what it filled me with was a fascination to know more about this woman who he wrote letters to for 40 years and sent all his music to. Who was she? Their letters are mostly about is music. Sure, there's some words of love and affection, and I'll get to that because it is fascinating. But what's most striking about their letters is how much they talk about his compositions. He sent her most everything he wrote, and the number of things he clearly wrote for her, but was rather too shy to say so for fear she might dislike it, is higher than we'll ever know. It's what my book is about, Madame Composer, the Virtuosic Genius of Clara Schumann, that will be out September 29th, 2026. Pre-order links in the description. In the book, I touch on the relationship some, but it's mostly about Clara's influence on his career, because she kind of made him famous. I made a video about that too, a link on that one in the description. But let's dig into the main question. What happened between Johannes and Clara? I'm gonna do this in a myth-busting fashion, because that's what's most interesting and complicated about Clara Schumann's legacy. That's different from any other woman composer. Everyone in classical music knows who she is, but most of the information is riddled with myths and suspicions, and let's just say male-dominated narratives meant to make them look good and make her look inferior. So when I'm talking about her, it's as much about clearing the air of the myths as it is about teaching people what really happened. So here's the 3 myths we're going to tackle in this video. 1. Clara had an affair with Johannes while her husband was in the hospital. That one makes my skin crawl. Myth number 2. Johannes supported Clara and her children after her husband died. That's just funny because it's the opposite. Myth number 3. Clara somehow inhibited Johannes's composing, and she was somehow bad for him. This one came from Leonard Bernstein, actually. He called her a syndrome that he had to get over to compose his first symphony. Obviously, that one kind of makes me rageful. Let's dig into myth number 1. Did Clara and Johannes have an affair while Robert Schumann was dying of syphilis in an asylum? Clara was famously married to the composer Robert Schumann. She loved this man to the point of worship. It's a little sickening sometimes to read the diary entries of how much she loved him. It's kind of self-effacing, but that's for another video. Despite Clara's effusive love for her husband in her diaries, numerous reputable books about Robert by musicologists have painted her as an adulterer. And this myth stems from Clara's life. She was slandered a great deal for it. In the 1920s, an actual pamphlet was published that was called Was Brahms, the father of Felix Schumann. As in slander, that Clara's last child was actually Johannes's son, not her husband's. Ugh, slander. But I should back up, because you need some background for this. This slander is easily disprovable by dates. The end of September 1853, Clara Schumann realized she was pregnant with her 8th child in 13 years of marriage at age 34. Hint, she was not happy about this. This pregnancy meant she had to cancel her spring tour to London for the 3rd time. The diary entry is so depressing. But Johannes arrived at the Schumann house that same week, October 1st. So the timing of the pregnancy was coincidentally kind of looks bad. But if you actually know anything about the timing of babies, you know they're made months earlier. So it's just wrong. For the month of October, Johannes was in the daily presence of the Schumann house. And whether Johannes lived with them or not is a point of contention, because Clara's daughter said he never actually moved in. After a month, Johannes left town. And then in February, Robert Schumann jumped in the Rhine because he was having horrible hallucinations so bad that he wanted to die. So he voluntarily committed himself to an asylum. Then Johannes came back, and Clara said he had come to comfort me with music if she had any wish for it. and he played the piano with her almost every day. And here's where the emphasis comes on the music. And some background on Clara Schumann is a little bit necessary in how she kind of lacked social skills because everything in her life was about the piano. And so that's how this 21-year-old man ended up falling in love with her, even though she had no idea. She was grieving her husband every day. She was 9 months pregnant and 34 years old. The idea that he might fall in love with her was something she didn't think of, but he did. Johannes wrote a letter to his best friend, Joseph Joachim, in June of 1854 that I admire her almost as much as I love and am in love with her. I don't think I can love girls at all anymore. After all, they only promise the heaven Clara shows us unlocked. And this is in triple parentheses. It was no joke. For Clara, music was everything. It makes sense more if you know about her childhood a bit. I made a video about that already, her Prodigy career. You'll find the link in the description. But Robert said she burned for music. And so Johannes came to understand this about her. Countless hours, we're talking thousands of hours at the piano together. That first month, Johannes played the first draft of what would become his first piano concerto with Clara, and she played him her variations on Robert's theme, her Opus 20, and then Johannes wrote his own version. So here's what's gotten lost in history. Everyone has latched on to the slander and missed the truth of what was actually happening. Clara was influencing this young composer, teaching him everything she knew about music and composition, and this went on for 40 years. Yes, that's right. After Robert died, Clara and Johannes knew each other for another 4 decades. Clara knew Johannes for twice as many years as she knew her husband. Yes, Johannes wrote words of love for Clara. Some of his letters, especially the early ones when Robert was in the hospital, are romantic as can be. I'll give you a little taste of some juicy tidbits. He wrote to her in 1854, I felt every minute as if I should like to return, the exhilarating and uplifting experience of being with you and having music together. Seems super romantic, right? If you take it out of context, it seems scandalous until you read the next sentence in the actual letter and it says, as well as having news of your beloved husband. And they're all like this. I would gladly write to you only in music, but I have things to say today which music could not express. The thing he had to express to her that was, quote, couldn't be done in music, he'd been to visit her husband. He needed to tell her about Robert. There's another one. You really do me too much honor when I think of you at the piano. My pieces seem to me to be consecrated, end quote. Here's where we get to the truth of how his feelings for her were wrapped up in the music he loved to compose so much. Here's another one from 1855. Johannes wrote to Clara, would to God I were allowed this day, instead of writing this letter, to repeat to you with my own lips that I am dying of love for you. Tears prevent me from saying more. Pretty scandalous, taken out of context, until you realize he was making a joke. He was reading the 1001 Arabian Nights book that she had given to him, and after that quote, he signed it Prince Bra. It was a joke. Another one from 1855. Night has come on again, and it is already late, but I can do nothing but think of you and am constantly gazing at your dear letter and portrait. Next, he talks about her children, how one of them has a cold, and another one wouldn't do his homework. Really scandalous love affair type stuff. Ha! He also talks about being so bold as to press a kiss into her hand. Here's another one. Beloved Clara, I am really quivering with the expectation of seeing you again. Each time I am parted from you, it becomes more difficult. Then after that, he adds the hope that her husband might come home to her soon. It's too easy to abridge these letters and make it look like a love affair. But truth, the occasional love sentence is concern for her husband, his taking care of her children, his trying to make her laugh with jokes, and his frustration at his composing and sending her little musical snippets. And the thing that really gets missed is, why was he writing her all these letters in the first place? It's not because he left. It's because Clara was on concert tour, making enough money to support her children and her husband's hospital fees because she refused to accept any charity. And that's how we get to myth number 2. Johannes supported Clara and her children after he died in the hospital. This one is so laughable because it's actually the polar opposite. Johannes was a 22-year-old poor composer when Robert died in 1856. He had no bank account. Clara berated him in letters for carrying his cash around in his pockets. When he left Dusseldorf and went back to Hamburg, he moved in with his parents. He had no money. There was no way for him to help support Clara and her 7 children. She had to do that herself. And she did, to the point of burnout and physical pain in her hands. She toured like crazy after her husband died. Switzerland, Netherlands, Vienna, London, Russia, Paris. She had to put her children in boarding school because she was rarely home. Which leads to the answer of the other thing so many people like to ask me, why Brahms and Clara never got married. He had no money. She had 7 children to support. And she very clearly wanted no more children. Remember how despairing she was at her last pregnancy, having to cancel her tour? Without a husband, she was free to tour and make as much money as she could. Lots of people have pointed to Johannes's reasons for why they never married. Like, he rejected her, he couldn't commit, he was afraid of attachment. But Clara had no inclination to marry again. She never showed any. She loved her independence, and in 1863, she bought her own house in Baden. I'm going to insert a little aside. Some people have interpreted Clara's independence, her love of it, her touring, etc., as proof that she never actually loved her husband. Please, just stop with that. She loved him. The end. The only exception to Johannes financially supporting Clara's children was 30 years after Robert died in the 1880s, when Johannes was in his 50s, Clara was in her 60s. One of her sons died very tragically and left behind 6 children who Clara now had to support. So Johannes, now being a successful composer, sent her 10,000 marks for her grandchildren. She tried to refuse it, but in the end decided it was too rude to send it back. I can't lie, in old age, their letters were very interesting, and they kind of sound like a bickering old married couple, even though they weren't. Which, I know, sorry, I'm probably filling you with even more questions, aren't I? Time for myth number 3. Clara Schumann was somehow bad for Johannes Brahms' composing. This one is so bogus, it's hard not to just label it in sexism in all caps, but let me treat it seriously, give you the facts. Johannes himself would be kind of outraged by Bernstein saying she was a syndrome, so it's shocking that such an ignorant thing can come from such a learned man. First, Johannes brought Clara most of his manuscripts. His major works, we have her opinions and critiques on them, from the first concerto to the 4th symphony. The smaller works he sent to her in the mail. The larger works he brought to her in person. And Clara's student, Adelina de Lara, said that even in his 50s, Johannes brought his works to Clara with respect, humility, and homage. The list of compositions, Johannes's works that were influenced by Clara, is long. Dozens were written for her, or with her in mind, always trying to please her exceptional standards and taste. So here's a sampling of just a few of them. The 3rd piano sonata was dedicated to her, and she premiered the middle movements. His early suite of Baroque dances was a birthday gift to her, and she gave his Vienna and London debuts with the Gavotte and the Sarabande. The early fugues from 1856 were gifts sent to her in the mail to London. A quote from his sextet first appears in a letter to her. He wrote a choral piece for her that was a graveside work for after Robert's death. The first piano concerto, she played it with him in its all many versions and even performed it with him conducting in Hamburg. There's even a quote of one of her melodies in it, but you have to read Madame Composer for that one. She was the first to play many of the chamber works. The Handel variations were written for her and she premiered them. The Paganini variations, what Clara called the Hexen variations, the witches variations, were given to her one summer when she was having hand problems and was in need of a new technical challenge. Her influence on the Requiem, its sentiment and mood, the comfort for the grieving, was very much Johannes's answer to her grief for Robert, and he was always just too shy to say that it was kind of for her. Most of the four-hand piano works, the Liebeslieder waltzes, the Hungarian dances, were intended to be and were performed with Clara. The biggest one is the first symphony. The horn call from the fourth movement was written in a birthday card to Clara 3 years before the symphony was completed. A lot of the songs and piano pieces from the late 1870s were written for her to comfort her as her son was dying of tuberculosis. The second piano concerto, the cello slow movement, is clearly a reference to the cello solo in her concerto. Plus, there is a quote of her work in that one too. Sorry, gotta read my book. He brought her the third symphony on her birthday. The intermezzos and the last piano opuses written in the 1890s were sent as reconciliatory gifts to her when they had a fight. The B minor intermezzo in particular has a reference to her romance in B minor that she wrote as a gift to him 4 years earlier. And this is literally just what I remember off the top of my head from all my research into Clara's letters and diaries. There's undoubtedly more, and even further, more that we don't know about. The idea that Johannes ever got over Clara is thoroughly false. He wrote to her at the end of his life, to her daughter, "For when those eyes close, so much will end for me." And the other direct quote from him about how important she was and her music was that really his best melodies should have been marked with her initials, because when I think of myself, nothing good ever comes. So to the myths that Clara was somehow bad for Johannes's composing is just laughable. I think he would disagree with it because it was really the opposite. We owe a great deal of gratitude to Clara for her influence on the works of Johannes Brahms. This is just a brief overview. I've probably filled you with more questions than answers. Their relationship was beyond traditional definitions. There's a lot more to find in my book, Madame Composer, that will be out at the end of September. It's available for pre-order, link in the description below. And if you want to motivate me to make more of these videos, please like, subscribe, and comment. I'd love to make more.